Hello, everyone. Okay, a very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Before I go much further, I just want to make sure that you guys are able to see me and hear me well. Sorry about all the mess behind. I just moved into a new room. Okay, it looks like I got one user, two users. Yeah, it's a platform, so it's really hard for me to sometimes see if people are able to hear me well or not. So thank you. Okay, okay, I got you confirmation that you guys can see well. Just want to make sure that you guys are able to hear me well as well. Okay, you can hear me. Okay, okay. I'll Okay, how about now? Now is it okay? Okay, it looks like you guys are able to hear me well now. Um, hmm. Right, let's. Some users are not able to hear me. Um, okay, I hate when this happens, but let's see. Let's try to figure it out. Okay, how about now? You can hear me? All right, finally. Okay, I don't know what I pressed because I literally didn't do anything. So I'm not sure what the glitch was. But anyway, so here we are. And all right. Yeah, so in the meantime, during the call, if you guys are not able to hear me again, please let me know. I'll try to do whatever I did again and see if that works. Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me from wherever you are. I know for some of you it's quite late in the night. I'm here out in the West Coast in Vancouver Island, so it's like to me now. And I really wanted to have this session on the darks because I felt it's very important, because I was working on a painting yesterday, which I will show you at the end of the call. And literally for an hour or two, I was just working on the darks. So I really wanted to bring in the importance of what the roles of the darks are and how you can use it, and what are the importance of it, and where you should have more of it, where you should have less of it, and things like that. Okay, so that was the whole purpose of this call. So before I get started, I just want to like briefly explain like the basic elements of painting, of any painting, and I really like to keep things very simple. um, and I just try to go from the very first principles. So whenever you are painting, which is completely different from drawing, we need to see in terms of light. No matter what you're painting, whether it's a still life or a portrait or a landscape, things get easier, and the language of painting starts and ends with light. Okay, so, and as you can see around you, whenever a light falls on an object, it the light starts immediately. It doesn't hesitate, or it doesn't wait for the object to do something. It starts immediately. Okay, so that's where the start of the light is. And based on how the object is, whether it's curving or whether it's flat, that indicates how much of darkness it's going to have, because it has to transition from light to dark. All right, so if you have a very flat object, you're just going to have a light. If it's a curved object, if it's a slowly curving object, the light's going to slowly turn towards the dark. If it's a very curvy object, then the light is immediately going to go to turn into dark. Okay, so that's all there is to it. So you have the lights and you have the darks, and the amount of transition in between depends on how curvy the object is, right? So let me, I have a few paintings here, so I'm just going to explain based on what's there. So just making sure everybody's able to hear me well, right? Just give me a thumbs up or say okay if you guys are able to hear me well, right? Okay, so as you can see here, if you see, the direction of the light is from this side falling onto the side. Okay, so whenever it hits the object, it lights up immediately. It's not going to stop and wait for the object to like do something. All right, so it's going to start immediately, then based on the curvature, it's going to go into the darks, right? So you have the lights and you have the darks. So that's the simplest explanation of light and a dark. Okay, so now the next question is, what is the role of the darks, right? Every element has a role in it, and we need to decide based on our application regarding the quantity of the light and the dark. So the main role of the dark is to provide it holds the light. All right, so that's why whenever I usually start my paintings, when I do the block-ins, I first block in most of it with my darks, because from the darks I can understand how much light an object can hold. Okay, so for example here, when I would have first done this block-in, I would have started with my darks, because now with my darks I can understand how much of light this object can hold. All right, so that's number one. The second main function of the dark is that it gives solidity to the object. So what do you mean by solidity? Like it holds the object in space. Okay, so for example here, because there's a strong cast shadow falling on the table, we know that this object is stuck or it's getting held down by the table. If it didn't have any darks underneath it, it 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 would have appeared as if it would have been flying in space. So that's why anything that's flying around doesn't have a dark underneath it. Okay, unless it's like very flying close to the ground, then you might have like a shadow falling slightly distant away on the ground. But anything that's very much on the surface of anything, you will have a strong cast shadow underneath it. And you have to add it in a sense because you need to make the viewer understand what the object is doing. Okay, even though you are not able to see the shadow, what you are trying to do in your paintings is that you're trying to convey something. So you need to make it a little obvious for the viewers so that he doesn't have to think or second guess as to what the object is doing. Okay, so you need to make the viewer understand that okay, the object is on the surface, and you can decide how much of cast shadow you need to have underneath that object. Okay, so those are the only two important functions of the darks. One is it has to hold the light, and the second thing is that it provides solidity to the object. Now, the amount of this, the amount of um holding or the amount of solidity, that depends on your painting. Okay, so you have a choice to decide how much of that quantity you need to add in your artwork, because every artwork is different, and in every artwork, based on the other objects that's around, you need to decide which objects get how much amount of darks. Okay, so that's the part of the vision which I usually talk about whenever you're starting any artwork, that you need to understand what's your priorities, what is the message that you're trying to convey, and based on that, you need to understand the direction of the light. And after the direction of the light, you are now uh, much more equipped in understanding how much darks you want to add in all the objects in your artwork. Okay, so that's that. Now, next thing, what I wanted to share was, so I also talked about where the darks are situated, right? So again, going back to this example, darks are usually situated on the opposite side where the objects curve away from the light. Okay, again, I'm going to repeat. So the darks are situated on the opposite direction of the light, and it's turning away from that direction. Okay, so that's that. Now, if you see, darks are absolute. Now, I understand when sometimes we talk about darks, we bring in our own colors, our own values, and our own everything into the darks. But if you see in a very simplest of terms, darks are absolute. And when I mean absolute is, it's like a black hole. So just imagine darks to be like a black hole. So whenever light enters into a black hole, it doesn't come out, right? So exactly the same thing happens in the darks as well. Whenever the light goes in the darks, it doesn't come back. Okay, so it's just a one-way street, and there is no way out. Now, if you want to have a light in the darks, then it comes in forms of reflected light. Okay, so that's a different topic, but the only light you can have in your darks is because of the reflected light, not for the darks themselves. Okay, and whenever you do landscapes, most of the times the absolute darks are in a very close corners, but most of the cases you will have a reflected light throughout your darks. So that's why you can see most of the hills and mountains are slightly bluer, because they're getting reflection back from the sky, from the blue sky. And whatever is not getting reflected back, it's having the direct sunlight hitting it. And on the other side, where the darks are, the majority of the dark region is getting the light reflected back from the blue sky. Hence, it's most of the times like blue or slightly warmer blue. Okay, so that's where some of the artists get confused, because they confuse the reflected light for the darks. But if you actually see, darks are absolute. Okay, the very next thing I wanted to talk about is, before I go on to talk about brush strokes and how you can add it to your darks doesn't have to be of the same color as the object. Okay, so for example, again, I'm going back to this painting here. This dark region here, it has nothing to do with the color of the object. So sometimes when I see artworks, most of them who are just starting out, they add the same color of the object, but they slightly dull it down, which is fine. But to have more impact, you need to understand what's happening on the area around the darks, whether it's getting the light from the table or from the atmosphere. So you need to understand what's happening with the area around, and based on that, you can decide the color of your darks. You don't have to decide the color of your darks from the object. Okay, the object has nothing to do with the color of the darks. All right, and as I said again, when I mean the color of the darks, it means the light that the dark area is able to get because of the light in the areas away from the direction of light. Okay, because that's the only way this region here can even get any light, right? So that's why painting is all about painting the light. You're not painting the object, you're only ever painting the light. Okay, I need to second to charge my laptop. So most of the times when when we when we get stuck into this painting process, we forget about what it is that we are doing, and we tend to focus more on the object. But as I said again, if you shift your if you shift your perspective, or if you change your thinking that, okay, you're not painting an object but you're actually painting light, then every time any object you see, you're now going to focus on, okay, which direction is my light? Okay, it's coming from here. Now what's happening on this side? Okay, so this side also there is some light, which means this light over here is going to affect what's happening in my darks. Okay, so just think in terms of light, and it gets much easier to understand what colors you need to add, whether it's in your light or in your darks. Okay, so that's the what I wanted to talk about, the color of the darks. Now the second thing what I want to talk about was the how much thick or thin you need to have your darks. Okay, darks are usually transparent, which means that when something goes through a transparent object, it's just a one-way road, right? So it should, like, if, for example, if it's going through this glass, the light is able to enter the glass and exit, right? So it's not getting reflected back. And the same thing happens for the darks as well. Darks are very transparent, which means things just go in, and unless you have like a reflected light, it's a complete absolute blackness. Okay, so since they're transparent, what you can do is you can use transparency uh, uh, paints that you have, like for example ultramarine blue, transparent red oxide, maybe alizarin crimson. So most of my darks, when I first start out, I mix these colors in different ratios based on how warm or how cool I want them to be. But you can start off with just a nice mixture of ultramarine blue, transparent red oxide, and alizarin crimson. Those three are wonderful transparent colors you can use for your darks. Now, if you want to slightly make your darks opaque, then you can just add a bit of cad red light or any cadmiums, because they are all the cadmiums are opaque, so you can use a bit of those and you can apply them to your dark mixture that you have done from either ultramarine, alizarin, or red oxide. Okay, so that's how I try to get slight opaqueness in my darks. Again, when I mean slight opaqueness, I mean that some of the reflection that's happening in my darks. Okay, because as I said earlier, darks are absolute. There is no point in even talking about colors, but any colors that's happening in darks is because of the reflection from the surroundings on the opposite side of the light. Okay, I'm just repeating it a few more times because I feel it's very important to understand the importance of dark and the reflected light. Okay, and now this second question where I usually get most of the uh, queries is where to have the darks. Now, if you see here, and if you again keep it to the absolute simplest terms, you have light moving to the darks. Okay, between the light and moving to the dark, you have the transition, which is over here, right? Which is happening over here now. So you have the lights, you have a small band of transition, and then you have the darks. Now, which means that the darkest dark of the darks is happening immediately after the light. Okay, so the darkest portion of the dark is just beside your light. So you have the light and you have the dark, and the darkest portion is just beside your light. Okay, anything that's happening after gets more light from the reflected light. Okay, please just give like a thumbs up or say okay, I understand it, just to make sure that I'm talking slowly and making myself clear as I go along. Any heads up would be great. So if you have any questions on this, please let me know now so that I can reiterate with few more examples. Okay, so you guys are able to understand me well? Okay, all right, perfect. Okay, so the darks happens immediately after the light, and anything that's happening after is because of the reflected light. So sometimes I see artworks where they have the darks at the very far end of the object, but not so much immediately after the dark. Uh, sorry, immediately after the light. That's not how it actually happens in the real case. So again, you don't have to take my word for it at any point. Like all these things that I've stated is because of my own observations. So whenever I say something, it's because I've like looked at it and been able to implement it in my own artwork. So my hope is that when I say something, that you guys test it out for yourself and see for yourself if it's true for you also or not. Okay, so the darks happen immediately after the light and not after. And if you want to have it after, that's the only thing where the reflected light happens. Okay, so adding the darkest dark in the very far end does not work. It just makes the curvature look a little odd. That's why sometimes most of the paintings, when they say it's flat, it's because they're not able to get a good 3D image onto a 2D surface. Okay, so if you want to avoid that, have your darkest dark immediately after the lights or immediately after the transition happens. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to talk about the darks was to keep your darks very simple. I see many paintings where they try to bring in so many different colors, so many different brushstrokes, and so many other values, interchangeable values. But all this does is it makes the viewer get stuck more in the darks and less in the lights. Okay, you need to make your audience look more in the lights and less in the darks. Okay, the darks are for us, like they are for us to make the paintings work. So the lesser you make the audience move only in the darks, the more impactful your artwork is going to be. Okay, so to do that, the best thing you can do is to have less number of color variations. That's one. The second thing what you can do is to have least amount of brush strokes in your darks. Just keep try to have as much softer edges of brush strokes as you can, because any hard edge in the darks is going to draw attention towards it. Okay, so make all the edges at least, if not 100%, at least 80 to 90% of all your hard edges in the darks have to be done into soft edges. Okay, and the other thing what I said was to have less variation of values and colors in the darks. As less variation you have, the more impact you're going to see in your artwork. Okay, so keep the darks very, very simple. Okay, so now I just want to like show you a few other artworks that I have where you can see my darks and lights. So this is one of the landscape painting which I had done earlier for the demo. So if you see, most of this region and even like this region, I would call it my darks, because there's not much happening there, and the whole uh, concept of even having this is to hold my lights. Okay, so these are my lights and these are my darks. Okay, so I, again, as you see, even though I have different colors here, unless you go very, very, very close, it's not visible. Like it's very subtle. And even if I sometimes accidentally have a different strong color, what I do is at the end I just make all my strokes uh, clean, or I make them soft, and I tend to blend in to make very few variations of colors that's there over here. Okay, because most of my interests, I want my audience to be moving in my light. Okay, so again I have these light strokes here, and again this I would call it my darks. And if I've assigned something my darks, I have very less brush strokes, and I try to keep it as flat as I can. Okay, so keep your darks very flat, and you can have all the 3D in your lights and during the transitions. Okay, so any questions on this one before I move to the next? No? All right, perfect. So the second painting that I wanted to show was this one, the small one. Again, if you see here, most of these are darks, and the only light that's happening is here and here. Again, this is my dark, and I just have a few highlights on the boat here. Okay, and again, this is very flat. Like all this dark regions are very, very, very flat, and I just have strong colors in my in my lights, because that's where all the interest has to be. Okay, so that's the second example that I wanted to show. Third example was the one that I had done recently for the demo, and it's this one. Okay, so again, if you see here, I have very little light, but I have a lot of dark. But even then, most of the interest or the eye tends to go towards my lights. Okay, so all my darks here, if you see, this is very flat. It's almost like a just a flat object. And even over here, even though this is not as dark as this, because it's slightly behind than this plane, which means that this is going to get some reflection from the sky, and also because there's so much air between here and here, right? So you're going to see more of air, and after that you're going to see what's behind that air. Okay, so that's why the color here, the value goes slightly up, and also the saturation goes down. So hence I have a few colors here, but again, the colors are very subtle, and all the edges here are very soft, and all my strokes are focused only in my lights. Okay, so again over here, even if you want to have some variation in your colors, you can just have it like very subtle, and then you can just make them as soft as you can, because the more harder strokes that you do, the more focus goes into your darks, which is not what you want to have. Okay, and here is another example. Let's see if I can get this in the screen. Okay, so here, even though my darks are not very dark, but most of the darks over here are very, how do I say, they are low in value, and they're very flat. I have not done more temperature variations in my dark. I've kept it more towards the cooler side, because the cooler side, the darker side gets the reflection from the sky. And very few regions have done it absolute, like for example, few places like here, and just around the flowers. But in the flowers themselves, the I've used the reflected light as my darks. Okay, and only the lights that I have here are the ones that are happening on the flowers. Okay, so that's where most of the attention is going to go, and that's in your lights. So the more strong your darks are, the higher the impact your lights are going to be as well. And in such cases, you don't have to work too much on your lights, because the darks would have taken care about it. And even if you add few lights here and there, uh, you will have a very, very high impact. All right, so those are the few points that I wanted to share, because I'm working on a painting, and I will send that image below in the comments, so that you can see how dark the image is actually is during my blocking. And I will talk more about this, because I'm planning to do a demo on this, and I'm keeping it very simple for those who are just starting out. And again, this weekend I'm hosting the free masterclass again. I highly encourage you guys to tune in. I'll probably do a demo or so in my masterclass. Again, there's always so much to learn. I know it can be overwhelming for somebody who's just starting out. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Uh, Regarding today's class, do you have any questions about your darks? Anything at all? Okay, I have one question here. How much darks to add and how can I define them from the start? Um, okay, that's a good question. So when you say define your darks, what I would suggest is try to see, like, when you have either your reference photo or if you're painting from life, first try to understand where your lights are, because if you're able to understand where your lights are, everything else you can tune them out into your darks. What I mean is you can quickly block in that entire other side into your darks and only have that small portion of that object where you assumed your lights were as your lights. Okay, so let's say you have like a street full of people and cars and everything. It's a very complicated scene, but again, it's complicated because you're thinking in terms of objects. But when you see it in terms of light, then your complexity narrows down, and now you can decide where you want to have your lights, right? It doesn't matter on what object it's falling on, whether it's falling on a car or whether it's falling on the street or if it's falling on people who are walking. You get to decide where the light's going to fall, and everything else you can assume is in the darks. So that's where your own style comes into play, because if you're just copying this scene as is, at the end of the at the end of your work, you're going to have like a replica of your reference, which is not what we want. What we want is your interpretation of the scene, and your interpretation starts from what you define to be your light and what you define to be your darks. Okay, so that's the number one. Like when you say like how to get into my own style and things like that, it's very important to understand that what's your interpretation in the scene. Okay, so let me see if I can show you this image what I'm working on. It's going to be a little shaky. Oops. Okay, give me a minute. Let's get tangled here. I've done this before. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's see if you can see here. All right. Okay, so this is a 30 by 40. So this is currently what I'm working on. So if you see, majority of this at the moment is in the darks. Okay, so I have my darks, and then I'm gonna add in my lights because the direction of light is gonna come from there. And I have all my darks placed in, and then even over here, if you see, I have the lights, then I have a bit of transition happening, and then on the edges I'm gonna have my darks. Okay, so all right, so let's see if I can keep this back without. So that's how you can quickly block in, no matter how small or big your canvas is, because once you understand where the light is and where the dark is, it doesn't matter what object it is that you're doing, because now all you're doing is having and painting the light. It's only when you go into your drawing mode, which is not the painting language. In the drawing mode, we are more focused on, okay, how the object is going to look and what are the boundaries of the object and things like that. But light doesn't care about like how the boundary works. It only cares about where it starts and where it ends. Okay, so whenever light hits the object, it starts instantly and there is no hesitation, and then it goes to the darks based on how much the transition is happening. Okay, So yeah, so I hope this helped. Do you have any other questions? Okay, Nathan, always enjoyable to watch your videos. Sometimes I learn something brand new. Other times, good reminder of concepts I had. Let's say, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions? So when is the next masterclass? Yeah. So I'm hosting one this weekend. Again, I will make an event form. Whether you're watching on LinkedIn or Facebook, it's going to be an hour long. So I'm going to be talking about the elements of painting and how to refine your brushstrokes, which is I think very important. And I'm going to be covering a bit more about the brushstrokes in the darks as well. It's going to happen this weekend, Saturday at 1 o'clock Pacific time. And I know, and only for those who have registered, you will get a replay link to watch in case if you're not able to attend. Yeah, I'm really hoping it's going to be a good turnout because last time it was a blast and so many of them were not being able to attend it. And yeah, I'm going to be sharing that link. I'm going to be watching out for your comments and questions. Again, if you're new, you can join my Facebook group, which is the Oil Painting Tips for Beginners. I can share that link again below in the comments, or you can follow that here. So that's called Oil Painting Tips for Beginners, and you can just log on to Facebook and you can join. And I'll be sharing the link for the masterclass after this. Okay, so any other questions before I leave? No? Okay. John says nope. All right. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll get back to my painting. I hope you guys enjoy your day, and I'll be looking forward to what you are working on. All right. Thank you and see you soon. Bye bye.